I see what ho chaps and shabits, Game Chap and Bertie here.
Yes.
Yes, fellows, and I dare say we have some very interesting news here about Super Smash Bros. DLC, future updates and more, don't we, old boy?
Well, most certainly do, yes indeed. Now, firstly, before we go forward, are we talking here about DLC for Smash Bros. 3DS or, of course, Wii?
Well, of course, Super Smash Bros. On Wii U comes out tomorrow at the time of upload. That's Friday, goodness me. And of course, indeed, very exciting, I must say. We are talking about DLC potentially for both games, I think, here, old boy. Although, of course, nothing's yet final. Now, this is not just speculation. This is actually a word, the official word, from Mr. Sakurai himself.
Most certainly, yes, of course. Now, we've seen DLC on MK8, Mario Kart 8.
Yes.
And it was quite good. There was some controversy about it, you know. Well, they've not done this before. Do we want
Mercedes DLC, Link
Mercedes DLC, etc., so forth. But it looks like they've lined up these two games for this as well. So before, in previous Smash Brothers games, we've just had Smash Brothers and that's it. You've got the game,
right.
And it's been like that until the next game comes out.
Yes,
but it looks like they're going to be taking this game and adding to it. Now, Mr. Sakurai was asked this question about DLC, and he said, I understand that DLC could add a lot to the appeal of Smash Brothers, and I think fans could really enjoy DLC that could keep this excitement going.
That's right, of course.
Well, just before you say, can I just say this?
Yes.
Well, it seems to me that Mr. Sakurai is thinking perhaps underneath, yes, we think this is a good way to make more sales as well and keep the thing going and going. Because what's easier, really, than adding DLC than having to make an entirely new game?
Well, this is interesting reading between the lines. So, Mr. Sakurai there, Fedel, said that he understands, again, DLC could add a lot to the appeal of the game and that fans could really enjoy it. So he's recognising the existence of DLC, which Nintendo traditionally haven't done in the past. He's obviously warm to the idea, and of course we know we already have Mewtwo in the pipeline, which we know now is of course either a paid or a free DLC, depending on whether or not you have both versions of the game.
Most certainly, yes, of course. Now, the thing is then, he then sort of cut in and tried to cover himself, perhaps. He said, however, I think there might be criticism that we are cutting up content to sell characters one by one.
Oh.
Yes, indeed. Or that we are adding things later that should have been there from the start. Well, Rob's chin, good point, Mr. Sakurai.
That's quite an interesting one. Now, it seems here Mr. Sakurai is very mindful of what the fans think, and perhaps he wants to avoid, I think, a certain degree of criticism. Perhaps fans complaining and griping and moaning and saying, this is no good, change that, change the other, etc. and so forth. Now, of course, one game that does rely heavily on its DLC is actually the Dead or Alive series, where you can download up to umpteen costumes and characters and whatnot and all sorts. And basically, it's like a DLC machine, if you will, once you made the initial purchase. So perhaps Mr. Sakurai might be saying that he does not necessarily want to turn Super Smash Bros. Into some kind of shop after you've made the initial game purchase, you say.
Most certainly. Now, I think there's two ways to look at it, just before we go into his next point. And that is, firstly, yes, well, why don't you just add all the things at the beginning so we've got them all there? But, of course, the other way to look at it is it makes the game more interesting if the game's out for 2 years or perhaps more before they bring the next one out.
Yes, yes.
There's new things being added here and there and here and there. It's sort of exciting. So you've got to pay for it, of course, but there's two ways to look at it, I suppose.
Yes, and I did very much enjoy some of Nintendo's past DLC offerings like Mario Kart, Fire Emblem, etc. and so forth. Now, Mr. Sakurai also said currently a huge amount of work has gone into the game, Super Smash Bros., as well as the individual fighters, and he added it might be that people may not understand and may think that I am not offering enough by just looking at the DLC by itself. So he then followed up by saying, in the light of that, we always need to weigh up both sides of this topic and carefully consider whether it really is best to have DLC or not. So it's very much on the table here. We don't yet know, it seems.
Right, okay, so he seems to be talking about it. I've got a feeling he's rather probably pleased that people are talking to him about DLC.
Yes.
Because obviously it's a money spinner for them. But of course it's also, as I said, good for you out there and us the fans, because they get extra content added to it if they don't mind paying the money, of course.
That's right, and of course Super Smash Bros. Does generate an awful lot of excitement. It's a very, very exciting series, all the Nintendo characters in one there, and the possibility of being able to play as your favourite characters that have not yet been announced for the game in the future is certainly one that will have some Nintendo fans salivating, I should think. It's very exciting, you know. So Mr. Sakurai, indeed, in summary, has perhaps confirmed that they are not actively working on anything right now, but they most certainly have not ruled out the possibility of DLC.
So, okay, so they're saying, at the moment we're not working on it, or so they say, but they haven't ruled it out. So I should imagine it's not that difficult for them to put that together if they want to, at any time.
I think so.
Well, certainly. So just picking up there, certainly something he said there, that they've put an awful lot of work into, for example, the latest Wii U that's coming out tomorrow. And if you look at that, and come and visit us because we'll be covering that a lot.
Oh yes,
we'll be doing some stuff on that. But certainly, yes, they have put a lot of stuff into that. They've put a lot of work into it. The characters are excellent. They seem to be.
Yes.
Get a new course. Sorry, not new course.
Stages,
yes. All sorts of things in there.
That's
so
right.
It's not been cheaply done. They've poured a lot into it.
Oh no,
So
you
that's
can't
good.
say it's been cheaply done. Now, of course, we do understand recently Mr. Sakurai was under fire for perhaps making the characters Lucina and, of course, Dark Pit, and perhaps direct clones, and also Dr. Mario. They really are very, very cloney of their respective characters, Marth, Pit, and Mario. But Mr. Sakurai actually struck back at those and said, this is like a luxurious meal, and then you get a free dessert, which is, of course, those clone characters. And he said perhaps that people were a little bit unappreciative there of the work that went into the actual game, and not appreciating that those three characters were a bit of a bonus. So if you consider that he thought those characters to be a bonus, that's Lucina, Dark Pit, and Dr. Mario, there is certainly a possibility that he might come up with some more ideas for bonus characters, or even whole new characters, as it were, and offer those at a later stage.
Yes, most certainly, in the form of DLC.
Yes.
And certainly the fact that he's talking about it, you can almost put it on the table that they're probably going to do it. I mean, he hasn't said he has, but the fact that he's talking about it is a good sign.
He's testing the water, isn't he? That's what he's doing.
Most certainly.
Yes.
And also, I think, the first thing, no doubt the chaps and chapettes out there will be thinking, well, this is very interesting, but I wonder. And of course, one of the things I think I can answer for them is, or at least address, is that, well, what might these characters be? Now, I'm just thinking, just as we're sitting here, that perhaps we might see characters who I think they were made trophies, perhaps we were thinking might be in the game. For example, Ridley, he could appear perhaps, for example, as a DLC character.
That's
Maybe.
right. Ridley is a tough question because, of course, he's already that stage boss
He's
or
a stage
assist
boss.
character
True.
on the Pyrosphere. Of course, another one, don't forget him, Rayman. There was the whole
Yes.
fiasco over Rayman back there. Of
Yes.
course, there are other characters. For example, Capcom, I don't know, could Ryu make an appearance as a guest fighter? Who only knows, old chap? There could be more from the Fire Emblem series. We could see certainly more Metroid or Donkey Kong reps, I think, because we don't have many of those in the game. We could see Dixie Kong, K. Rool, etc. and so forth. There's many ways Nintendo could go here.
Sonic?
We've already got Sonic City. We could have Tails, I suppose, there.
With Tails, yes, some of them in from the Sonic series.
Or Knuckles,
I suppose.
perhaps.
Dr. Eggman.
Yes, Dr. Robotnik.
I suppose.
An Advanced Wars character, who knows? Now,
Yes, who do you think they should add? If they did do DLC, would you be prepared to pay it? And pay that little bit extra, a few dollars or pounds wherever you are? And which characters would you perhaps like to see? We'd be interested to see.
and of course also, would you be happy fighting against people online who bought the DLC and had access to those characters and were actually playing as them, but you couldn't?
Ah, that's a good point. Yes, that's a very good point.
Yeah.
Especially if they bring in those characters who've got better attributes.
And if, for example, a DLC character just happens to reach the top of the tier list, it could cause an uproar, old chap.
Well, most certainly, yes, indeed.
It
That's
could
a good
do.
point.
Now, Mr. Sakurai also remarked, what I can see now about paid DLC is that we aren't working on anything at the moment. I can't yet give you an answer about whether the price would justify the costs and criticisms, so he's quite concerned, it seems, about fan response.
Right, well, that's an interesting statement, because he says in one sentence there, we're not actually working on anything at the moment, but then says, but I can't yet give an answer about whether the price would justify the costs and criticisms. So in one he's saying we haven't done it, but in the other part he's saying in the other part of his head, but we are thinking about it, in a roundabout sort of way.
They must be having the meetings round the table with this on the whiteboard, I think, perhaps saying should we or shouldn't we, and doing all the calculations, old chap. But
well, most
now,
certainly, but one, just picking up there,
yes.
the costs and criticisms, they obviously are concerned of being sort of dragged out and hung up there and said, look, you're just by the
Money
lapels,
grabbers.
as it were, and shake it and say, look, you're just after more money, and
That's
that's
right.
what you're after.
Yes, indeed. Well, I suppose we can cut him some slack. The poor fellow was very overworked with this whole thing. But anyway, when asked about the possibility of adding more roster fighters, he again replied, as it takes a lot of work to add a character to the game, it's not a decision that can be taken lightly. So really he's saying, look, if we do add someone to the game, it's going to be an awful lot of work just programming them, the animations, the moves, and of course the balance takes ages, etc. and so forth. So he'd have to be sure of a winner every time.
Well, that's a very good point. Yes, of course. They would have to make sure it works because it obviously takes some time, etc. But then also, it has to be said, perhaps he's spinning that to us to say, well, look, it's going to take an awful lot of time, so perhaps we might do it. And then we think, okay, yeah. Well, and then it sort of prepares us more and more for saying, yes, okay, we'll have it when they do it. So.
And of course, we already know that Mewtwo is indeed on the way. We can say that for sure. So he really is a taster, I think, of what's to come. That's my personal view on it, old chap.
Well, yes, I think that's a good point.
Yes,
I
think
think
so.
Since we've seen the MK8 8 DLC.
Yes.
And we did something on that recently.
There's more of that, of course, next year as well.
Most certainly, if you haven't seen, go and have a look. Until next year, they're bringing another pack out.
That's right.
They obviously, the Nintendo boys at the top there, obviously feel that's a good idea. Well, no doubt when the money starts to flow in of the extras and they keep buying it, they will.
That's
and
right.
so perhaps then they'll be passing it down to Mr. Sakurai and saying, look, it's probably a good idea if you have a crack at this as well.
I think perhaps he might be pressured from the top there, by
So if you ask me, I think there's a good 80-20 chance in favour that you're going to see DLC.
Yes, I think 80-20, old chap, certainly. And of course, it prints money for Nintendo, so there you are. Now, of course, we recently saw a balance patch for Smash 3DS. However, Mr. Sakurai declined to comment on how long patches would continue, saying it hasn't been decided on how long to support the two titles with updates. So they certainly have said that there will be more patches on the way, or certainly implied that at the very least, but he hasn't yet said how long those will continue in the long run.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, if they're adding DLC, they're probably going to want to increase or elongate the support, the updates and things.
That's right. They'll have to fine-tune the balance to make sure the new characters aren't overpowered.
True, and also, of course, with updates, where they've got to be careful is people who are learning characters and how they work, etc. If they're always updating them, and those updates were to, as in the case of 3DS that we reported on recently, affect the character's gameplay, etc., well, then players are going to get a bit fed up with that. If they've just taken 2, 3, 4, 5 months to master some moves, and then they change them slightly, then they've got to start learning all over again.
Oh yes, and some advanced moves in Smash are really hard to master and pull off. It's deceptively complicated. Some of them require very, very precise button timings, and a small change can send the whole system out of balance, requiring a lot of relearning, etc. So, indeed, I think there's certainly a fine line they have to tread here to ensure they provide the best experience for fans whilst not upsetting people in the process.
Most certainly. So I think, even though Mr. Sakurai has said, we're sort of talking about it, but there's nothing we're not guaranteeing anything. I think there's a jolly good chance you're going to actually see DLC for these two games. I'm sure for all the Smash Brothers games.
Yes.
Because it seems to be the way the industry's going. DLC is becoming more and more popular for obvious reasons.
And of course, the game has been coded from the ground up with DLC in mind. We've got Mewtwo to support that, and of course, some fans have actually stripped open the game and seen ways they can actually inject DLC into the game. So, of course, the framework's there, the idea's there. All they've got to do is actually start putting the elbow grease into practice to make it work.
Most certainly. So, I mean, what do you think out there? Do you think they should have DLC or not? Are you happy with paying money for DLC?
That's right.
Or are you a bit cheesed off and saying, well, no, we should have it all in the game at first?
Well, indeed, it's two sides of the camp there, but what do you think, Fiddles? Right, Daniel, this has indeed been Game Changing Buddy with the latest Super Smash Bros. News. Do join us again, I say. We look forward to seeing you then. Until then...